Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. Before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about, and there was a campaign announced for the game Fromage, which you might have guessed is a standalone sequel to the game Fromage, which I believe is just getting delivered to the previous backers now. But this was a really interesting game that I did almost back because I think it has a few interesting mechanisms going on with it, with the main mechanism being that this is a game where you're going to be putting out different types of cheese on different types of boards, with each of those boards working a little bit differently. But the cool thing about these boards is that they are all part of a circle and they're going to be rotating, giving you access to those different boards depending on which side's facing you. The reason that the rotation actually matters in this game is because as you're putting out your workers, they're going to be fitting into these different slots that are pointing in different directions, and you don't get your worker back until your worker is facing you. So the way that your worker is facing when you initially put it out is going to determine how long you have to wait before you get that worker back. I'm really interested to see what this new version is going to bring to the table because, like I said, this was one that I did almost back, and the reason that I didn't back it is just because there was no overlap between the different boards that you're interacting with, and they were all like their own individual mini games. And I just would have liked to see another layer on top of this game that kind of connected those different regions that you're working with, where what you do on one board might affect another. The nice thing about that critique is that it can be easily addressed with an expansion if that is something that they want to do. I don't know if it is, but I am really interested to see what this new expansion adds into the game, and it looks like this one will be playing very similar to the original because it can be played on its own, but it can also be combined with that previous game. If you're interested in this one, you can go ahead and check out the pre-launch page on Kickstarter now and click to get notified, but of course I will be covering this one in a lot more details during the week of its launch, which hasn't been announced yet, so feel free to subscribe down below and I will have you covered once we do get a little bit more info on this one. We're also getting near the end of the month here, so I do want to give a quick mention to Alex over at Boardgame Co. as well as Michael over at Zilla Blitz, because I do work with each of them to keep track of all these upcoming campaigns. And if you do like these weekly videos that I provide, both Alex and Michael provide a monthly video going over the entire month, with Alex focusing more on the heavy hitters, but then Michael focuses exclusively on the historical war games, which is an area that both Alex and I do not cover in near as much detail, and there are also some other crowdfunding platforms that offer this genre of game. Of course, they both do offer a ton of other content like reviews and playthroughs, especially focused on games and crowdfunding, so if you are looking for a little extra help trying to decide which games you want to back, either of these content creators will definitely have you covered. And Alex, I'm still waiting on your review for Vestige because I am not backing that campaign until I know what you think of it, so no pressure. But I'll have a link to both these channels in the description down below, so feel free to go ahead and check them out. And things are slowing down a little bit with the campaigns now, and I am getting slightly caught up on all my emails and messages, so if you are waiting to hear back from me, you should get a message really soon. But for now, we got some upcoming campaigns, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on November 25th, and this is going to be introducing two new editions of the game Last Aurora. And these are going to be the Frostlands and the Firelands editions. And if you're not familiar with the original game, this is a game that takes place in a post-apocalyptic world that has fallen into a nuclear winter. Each player is going to be running their own convoy of vehicles, racing against the other players while also being hunted by machines and enemy raiders. And of course, there's going to be other obstacles and the environment itself that the players are going to have to deal with. Each of these new versions are going to be introducing modular maps that you can piece together out of multiple boards, asymmetrical characters, as well as modular bonus actions to differentiate yourself even more from your opponents. But then there's also going to be a completely revised combat system and brand new loot mechanisms. Of these two new versions of the game, you can think of Frostlands more like a second addition to the original game, because there will be an upgrade pack that allows you to upgrade your standard edition if you do already own it, and it's going to be playing more true to that original game, whereas Firelands you can think of more as a standalone expansion because it is going to be building on top of those rules, adding a few new complexities and additional layers if you are looking for a little bit more. Of course, there's also the thematic differences, and Frostlands takes place in a frozen wasteland depleted of its resources, and players are trying to reach a ship at the other side of the board in order to escape the frozen north. Firelands does take place in the same world, except for it takes place in a desert where there's a city that also has a piece of technology that allows them to separate the fog of the nuclear winter and allow the sun to shine through. But of course, this does bring in its own hazards that the players are going to have to deal with. And in this version of the game, players are not trying to reach a ship, but instead you're trying to outrun an electrostatic storm, either reaching that fortified city or finding shelter in a cave. Like I said, this is an expanded version of the game, so it's going to be adding a few different mechanisms like contaminated food, which provides stronger bonuses to the players but increases their contamination. It also features rock slides rather than avalanches, which can both block your paths, but the difference with the rock slides is that they can actually be crossed if you do have the right tools, but they can have varied effects when you do decide to cross them. And you're going to be flipping a token whenever you cross one of these locations in order to reveal what that effect is going to be. And then once done, any player can then also take that shortcut since you've cleared it, but they will also have to face that same repercussion of whichever token was there. The rocks aren't the only thing you have to worry about getting in your way though, because like I said, there is a fortified city here and they're going to be closing different gates along different paths in preparation for the upcoming storm. And if one of those gates closes before you're able to get there, you're going to have to find an alternative route. Luckily, another difference here is that there is dual endgame locations. You can either get to that city or you can get to the cave entrance in order to get these scoring bonuses and avoid any repercussions of being left in the storm. But of course, each of these are going to be offering their own distinct scoring criteria. This version also introduces a new type of survivor that's going to be using a fury point system in order to take actions. And this version also introduces flamethrowers, which brings in a whole different ammo type, and there are going to be more options with encounters and loot as you play throughout the game. And the way that these games play is over 6 rounds where players are going to be using their cards to take various actions. And in order to set up the main board, you're going to be taking 3 different terrain boards and putting them together to create that map. As part of the main board, there's also going to be an exploration zone that has 5 different locations where you're going to be drawing cards from the exploration deck at the start of the game and then assigning a card to each of those locations randomly. These cards remain there until they are used or removed for various reasons, and then you're just going to be replacing them with a new card from the deck. Like I mentioned, players are primarily taking their actions through their cards, but each player is also going to have this board in order to keep track of the current state of their cards, because the way that they work is that you're going to have a bunch of different survivor cards that can have different effects as well as a value associated with them, and that value represents how many points they're going to be giving you to spend on your various choices of actions. Players are going to be taking turns performing just one action at a time, but you have a few options that you can choose from. You can move your survivor cards from the active zone into the exhausted zone in order to spend their total amount of points to activate any of those exploration cards at the bottom of the main board. These normally allow you to do things like gather different resources, upgrade your convoy, or even gain new items or even additional survivor cards. But rather than moving a card to the exhausted zone, you could instead move it to the rest zone, and this will allow you to spend those points to repair your convoy rather than performing those exploration actions. The final action you have is to pass, but once you do that, you can no longer take any other actions. And then once all the players have chosen to pass, that's going to be triggering the end of the action phase, where any of your rested survivors are going to be moving back into the active zone, and then any of your exhausted survivors are going to be moving into the rest zone. So you can already see when you choose to exhaust survivors, you're going to have to wait 2 rounds before you get them back, whereas if you choose to get a rest action, you're going to be getting them back in the following round. I did mention food before, and if you do have any, you can actually use it for additional skill points or to recover some of your survivors early. Players will then all be able to move their convoys out on the main board, and the amount that you get to move is determined by your convoy's current speed, and players are going to be spending fuel as well as nitrous oxide in order to do this. And of course, there's all sorts of different routes that you can take, including shortcuts, but any of the locations that have any effects, you're going to be activating them as soon as you stop on those locations. At the end of this phase, players do also update their turn order based on their relative positioning out on the board. Players will then check if there's any enemy cards in the exploration zone beneath the main board, and if there are, they're going to get moved to the region where the leading convoy is located, and then the ambush effect of that enemy card is going to be resolved, dealing damage or applying negative effects to any of the players in that region. The players in that region can also fight back, taking turns attacking the enemies by using their weapons and ammo. Any enemies that are defeated this way are going to be granting loot proportionally to those that contributed to their damage, and then any surviving enemies are going to issue another attack, which is going to be determined by drawing an outcome card. The rounds continue like this, with players trying to reach one of those final destinations, and if you are able to do that, you're going to be gaining additional victory points for making it to the end, but players will also be gaining victory points from the different cards and items that they gained, and any other victory points from defeating enemies or completing other objectives. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below, and of course you can click to get notified. And launching on the 26th, we have Mighty Shot, and this one's a really interesting one because it is a head-to-head tactical duel, but it also incorporates action selection with some dexterity elements. The way that this game works is that each player is going to be choosing an asymmetrical champion that they want to play as. And there's a whole bunch that you can choose from, but they're also going to have their own asymmetrical powers, minions, and their own home field. And you're going to be taking those two fields and then combining them together into the overall battlefield. The way that the game actually plays is that players are going to be taking turns over a series of rounds, deploying their minions into the various control areas on their side of the field, which is going to allow them to collect arcana, which they can then spend to take various actions or injure their opponents directly. In order for a player to take actions on their turn, they're going to have 3 action tokens. There's going to be 2 standard ones and then a signature token. You'll be able to perform any of your standard actions with your standard tokens, and this allows you to summon new minions into your domain or move existing ones out on the board according to their movement points. Or instead, you could spend a token to play one of your cards, and there's a whole bunch of cards offered in the game that all have varying special effects. Or finally, you could use one of those standard tokens in order to shoot a projectile. Whenever you attack an opponent in this way, you're going to be using your shooting track, which is a completely separate board. But the way that this works is that you're going to be shooting your token from one side to the other, trying to hit one of the colors on the target, because each of those colors are going to be correlating to different locations out on the board, and these are all color coded. So this means if you are on a white location, that's going to be a little bit easier to hit than the black locations, and then of course the red locations are the most difficult. These shooting tracks also have some other locations that if you have the right cards or powers, you might actually be able to add some additional tokens onto yours or your opponent's shooting track in order to grant you with some different effects, such as adding obstacles to block your opponent's attacks. These basic actions are going to work very similar for all the champions, but it's that third action token, which is your signature move, which is also going to be unique depending on which champion you're playing as. This is going to allow you to issue a powerful attack if you do meet the requirements to perform it, and it can also come with some other bonus actions or effects that can also be scaled by aligning it with certain conditions. But once each of the players have performed their actions, you're going to be moving into the end of the round, where each player is going to be drawing back up to their hand limit of 4 cards. And as you issue those attacks to your opponent's minions, you could be potentially knocking them off the board, but when you issue attacks to your opponent's champion, you're going to be reducing their overall health. The first player to reduce their opponent's health down to 0 wins the game, and if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And also launching on November 26th, we have Biblus Chronicle I, and this one is a Bible-themed party word game where players are working together to try and solve different rebus riddles. And if you're not familiar with what those are, rebus riddles use different words, colors, symbols, or numbers in order to give clues to a certain word or phrase that the players are trying to guess. These are just some generic examples to give you an idea of what these riddles are, but of course the ones offered in this game are all going to be related to the different verses and passages in the Bible. The way that you actually play the game is over a series of turns, and each turn there's going to be one player acting as the lead player. They're going to be drawing a card from a deck, and one side of that card is going to have the actual riddle on it, and then the other side is going to have the answer. The card's going to be placed out riddle side up for all the other players to see, and then players are going to be racing to try and guess the correct answer of that riddle, and the first player that's able to do it gets to claim that card as a point. If that happens, or if no one's able to solve it in a reasonable amount of time, then the lead player is going to be passing that deck to the next player, who then becomes the lead player, and the game continues like this until you go through all the cards, and then the player with the most cards at the end of the game wins the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. And also launching on the 26th, we have the Spirits of Christmas, and this one's a cooperative game where players are working together to take Scrooge through the past, present, and future in order to show him the error of his ways. This one is a campaign that I did cover in the past, but they've pulled it down and made some tweaks, and they're relaunching it now, and some of the changes that they made to this is completely redesigned artwork, a smaller box, and a lower price point, making this one even more attainable than it was in the previous campaign. So if you did follow along with that one, or if you were a backer, this is another chance to jump in on it. Or if you haven't heard of this one yet, I will go ahead and roll my previous footage for you, and if you do want to check it out for yourself, I will have it linked in the description down below. And this is a cooperative game where players are trying to take Scrooge through scenes in the past, present, and future, and trying to change his ways. Each player is going to be starting the game with a number of spirit cards, each with a movement value on them, as well as a virtue. And there's 3 different types of virtue in the game. There's compassion, contentment, and charity, and players will be using those to try and fulfill different scene cards throughout the game. And the game plays over 3 rounds for past, present, and future, and each round is going to be set up with Scrooge starting in his bedroom, and then you're going to have a river of cards below that representing the scene for that moment in time. And players can take the move action and then spend a card for its movement points in order to move Scrooge that number of points down the river, and then you'll be able to interact with whichever card Scrooge is currently on. Some cards are resolved immediately just for landing on that card, which can give you different benefits like coins or additional cards, while other cards can have different icons on them representing the requirement needed to fulfill that card. And if you have those cards and then you also play the play cards action, then you'll be able to spend those cards in order to flip that card over. And the third type of card is the torch card, and if you move Scrooge here, you'll be able to gain the torch token, and that will just go onto the rondel, and any player can play that on their turn in order to take an action for free. Players can also use an action to draw 3 cards into their hand, or to give cards to another player that they think they might need to fulfill one of the cards on the river, because you are able to fulfill those cards by using the play cards action with just 1 card at a time, but it's much more efficient if you can get 1 player with all those cards and then perform that action just once. But in order to move around the rondel and take the different actions, you're also going to have to spend coins to do so, and if you ever run out of coins before you fulfill all the different requirements of the cards, then you have lost the game. And of course, to win the game is to complete all those scene cards from past, present, and future, and if this one sounds interesting to you, I have links in the description below. And also launching on November 26th, we have Fly for Pie, and this one is a really interesting pick up and deliver game, because this is a game where every time you move, you can actually move in any direction you want, but you can also move as far of a distance as you want. The way that all of this works is that all players are going to be playing on the shared board, and every player starts in the house at the bottom of the board. Each player is going to have their own hang glider as well as a pet bird, and the goal of this game is to fly around the board and pick up as many berries as you can in order to try and score the most victory points. Whenever you're able to fly over one of the berry tokens, you're going to be drawing a card from the associated berry deck, which is going to indicate how many victory points that particular card is worth. Like I said, every time you can move as far as you want and also in whichever direction you want. But one thing to note about movement is that you can only move in a straight line, and you're also not able to fly over mountains. Things also get a little bit more difficult as the game goes on, because every time that you collect one of these berry tokens, you're going to be adding it to the side of your board, and with every berry that you add, you're going to be getting a little bit heavier. If all this extra weight dips you below the tree line, then not only will you not be able to fly over mountains, but you won't be able to fly over the trees either. But the berries do also have another use, because you can choose to feed your bird up to 3 berries throughout the game, and anytime you do that, you're going to be moving the berries from the left of your board into the track on the bottom. This not only reduces your weight, but it also allows you to take one of 2 possible actions. You can either get an additional movement during that round, or instead you can peek at 2 of the berry decks of your choice in order to see what the value of the upcoming cards are. But this game plays over a series of rounds where at the start of each round you're going to be rolling a die, and that's going to cause the weather marker to move 1 to 3 spaces up the weather track around the perimeter of this board. Wherever that token lands determines the weather for that round, which also determines how many times each player is allowed to move. Players will be taking turns spending those movements to move their glider along the board, and like I said, you can move in any direction in a straight line in as far a distance as you like, so long as you're not flying over any mountains, and that you're only flying over the trees if you're still able to. The rounds continue like this until the weather marker reaches the end of the track, and then that's going to be triggering a thunderstorm, and any players that haven't made it back home by then are going to have to drop everything and lose those victory points, but everyone else is going to be adding up all the victory points from the cards that they're able to collect, and the player with the most wins the game, and in case of a tie, it's the player who got home first, which is going to be the winner. This one is a print and play, which does make it quite affordable, so if you are interested to try this one out, I will have it linked down below, and you can go ahead and follow along if you do want to get notified. And also on the 26th, we have a new expansion for the game NEXUS, and I'm not going to get into this one in too much detail because I did already cover it in the past, but this new expansion is going to be adding the Alone in Your Room expansion, which is going to allow you to play the game solo. The game does look like a lot of fun, and I wouldn't be surprised if they also offer some of their original content in this campaign as well, so if you do want to check that out or see what this solo experience has to offer, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below, but if you want to know more about how the game actually plays, like I said, I did cover this one a couple times in the past, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is an expansion to the game NEXUS Arena Combat, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a competitive game where players are each going to be managing their own team of gladiators, except these aren't your usual gladiators because these are mutated monstrosities. And this game actually has a couple different aspects to it because there's going to be the main chunk of the game where you're actually fighting against your opponent, and you're going to be fighting with your mutants against your opponents, and because these are somewhat uncontrollable mutants, they may not always do what you want them to do, which is a fun aspect of this game. But because you're playing as the manager, there's actually more that you can do actually outside of the combat, because there's a few different things you can put into motion before the battle in order to rig certain aspects to your advantage or to put your opponent in a position where they have to make some poor decisions. But like I said, this new campaign is going to be introducing a new expansion to this game, and this expansion is going to be adding a few different modules into the game. There's going to be the hostile entities, which are going to be adding some different monsters that will enter into the arena and be threats to both you and your opponent. But then there's also going to be the mutation cards, which you can use to assign to your different mutants in order to move them through different mutated states and kind of change the way that they operate throughout the progression of the battle. Of course, there's going to be brand new different types of fighters that you can introduce into the game. There's just going to be a bunch more content added with this expansion that you can just mix right in. But then there's also going to be a bunch of new hazards and barriers and traps that are just going to be adding a little bit of variety into the actual arena where the players are going to be fighting. This is actually a game that I've covered a few times with the original launch, but then they also did release a campaign expansion that allows you to play through a legacy campaign, which looks like a ton of fun and offers a variety of different modes of play and also improves different aspects of the game as well. But instead of just going through all of that again, I'll just go ahead and roll my previous footage for you where I also rolled the previous footage to that. We're getting into the board game inception with this one, but if it does look interesting to you, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. And of course, you can click that notify me button if you want to get notified once it launches. And this new expansion is going to be adding a brand new legacy campaign to that original game. But this new expansion is essentially all encompassed with a single rulebook, because within this rulebook, it's going to offer you all sorts of campaigns and storylines for players to explore. But then also there's portions of the book where you're going to be making different decisions or recording the results of different games that's going to change the way that the game plays moving forward. It doesn't look like you're destroying any components other than this rulebook by playing through this legacy campaign, so if you wanted to record your different results in a separate notebook and just keep this one pristine, that would allow you to reuse this in order to play multiple campaigns. Not only that, but it looks like this new rulebook is going to be including some new ideas and concepts that you'll be able to mix into the original game, and they did also take feedback from their player base, and it looks like they're going to be including some refreshed rules as part of this, with some rules clarifications and small tweaks just to make the gameplay a little bit better. And this was a game that I thought looked like a ton of fun when it originally launched, so it's nice to see them improving it even more. And if you do want to know how this one plays, I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is a head-to-head skirmish game where each player is going to be controlling their own team of gladiators, but these aren't just regular gladiators, these are actually mindless genetic freaks. And each player is going to have some combination of skills across 3 different areas, which is their command, their influence, and their deception. And the command allows players to give their elite gladiators some special abilities, while their influence allows them to access bribes and other nefarious deeds in order to influence cards before the battle. And then your deception allows you to force your opponent into making some poor decisions. And this game also has a really interesting take on combat because it has story-driven combat where the events and cards that you play will create a bit of a story that will make each game unique from the one before. And the game offers a few different arenas to play on, with each one representing a poorly maintained space barge, each with their own hazards that you can take advantage of or avoid, as well as some loot crates to gain some extra weapons. And each round, players are going to be taking turns spending their command points in order to influence their gladiators to make certain actions, but the gladiators do have a mind of their own and they may not always listen. The team with the last gladiator standing is going to win the battle, but the player with the most fame at the end of the game wins the game. And also on the 29th, we have Power Creep, which is a solo post-apocalyptic roll and write, where each round you're going to be rolling 6 dice and then using those dice to do things like craft different items or attempt to build and power different buildings, with each of those buildings granting you with long-term special abilities that can help you throughout the rest of the game. And this one is also a print and play that makes it super affordable, so if you do want to check it out, I will have it linked down below. And launching on the 30th, we have Legend of Gonia, which is a 2-player head-to-head strategy game that is described as a synergy between a card game and chess. And there isn't a whole lot of info on this game, but it looks like you're going to be controlling different units that have different movement patterns and possibly special abilities. And you're going to be using those to either take out your opponent's leader or completely wipe out their tribe. The similarity to chess comes from the different pieces and their different movements, and you'll be able to use that to try and corner your opponents. But then you also have the different abilities from the different cards that you'll be able to use to your advantage to issue attacks from a distance or break the rules of your units or the game in different ways to try and overpower your opponent. If you do want to learn more about this one, I will have it linked in the description down below, and of course you can click to get notified. The next game I'm going to cover is a bit of a special one because it is one that I designed, although it is loosely based off the White Elephant, which, if you're not familiar with, is a gift-giving game that many people play during the holidays, and I do have this designed with Christmas in mind, but it's not limited to Christmas. You could use it for whatever you celebrate or any occasion where you're going to have some sort of gift exchange. The reason I designed this one is because I wanted a fun game that everyone can play during Christmas, so the rules of this one is very simple, but it doesn't have the same holes and issues that the White Elephant has. And I can explain this in just a minute here, and you don't have to know how the White Elephant plays, but if you are interested in that, you can check out my other video here where I do break down how to play the White Elephant, how to play my game, and the differences between the two. But all you need to play this game is just a deck of cards, and any deck will do. I just happened to grab some Grinch playing cards because I like the little bit of fun it adds to the theme. And I know I do have some different colored envelopes here, but you don't actually need those at all to play the game. I think it just adds a little bit more to the theme and adds a little bit more fun to the experience. Especially since my family does play this every Christmas, this just kind of gives that letters to Santa sort of vibe. But all I do with these is I just shuffle up the cards. You don't even have to use the whole deck. You just need as many cards as there are people playing the game. And like I said, this is a gift-giving game, so you do need to plan a little bit in advance and make sure that everyone who's playing does bring a gift, usually around $20 to $30. Everyone does need to wrap their gifts in advance, but you don't put any labels on them at all. You don't say who it's for or who it's from, because you're just going to be putting all these gifts in a single pile once everyone gets together to play the game. You're then going to be dealing a card to each player randomly, and they're not allowed to look at it. And that's the reason I have the envelopes, because I just go ahead and put a single card in each of the envelopes. And then rather than just getting a card, every player gets an envelope with a card hidden inside it. So the way that the first player's turn is going to work is that they're just going to walk up to the pile of gifts and choose whichever wrapped gift looks most appealing to them. Then they're going to be taking it back to their seat and unwrapping it. And that's the end of the first player's turn for now, and I'll come back to that in a second here. But then it's going to be the second player's turn, and they're going to be doing the exact same thing, just going up to the pile of gifts, choosing one to take back to their seat and unwrap. But the difference here is that they can choose whether to keep that gift or swap it with any of the other previously unwrapped gifts. In this case, they only have the first player to trade with, but if they want to trade their gift, the first player has no choice but to allow it to happen. The catch here is that every time you force another player to trade with you, you also have to give them all the envelopes you have in your possession. So in this case, the second player would swap with the first, and then the second player would give the first player their envelope, meaning that they have no envelopes in their possession anymore, but the first player would have 2 envelopes. But things start to get really interesting the more gifts that are open, because let's say the third player went up and opened their gift and they got this little badge here. They can then decide to steal any of the previously opened gifts. So maybe they wanted to steal the bottle cap, so in that case they need to give their envelope to the first player, and then they would swap gifts. But this is a cascading effect, so every time that you have a gift stolen from you, you can decide if you want to steal a gift from someone else. You can't swap a gift that's already been swapped for that round, so in this case, the only person that the first player could steal from is the second player. If they wanted to do that, they'd have to give all 3 of their envelopes to the second player, because you always give away all of your envelopes every time you steal. But the game continues like this with the different gifts and envelopes being shuffled around as more players unwrap gifts and add them into the mix and steal from the other players. And the stealing might seem a little mean, but it's actually not a bad thing, because it's a mechanism that makes sure that more people are getting the gifts that they want once the entire game is over. But as you get more and more envelopes into your possession, the less likely you're going to want to steal from someone else, because these envelopes are going to give you a very special power at the end of the game if you have the highest sum of cards in your possession. So let's say that these got shuffled around and there's other gifts added, and the first player ended up with this, and the second player ended up with the bottle cap, and the third player ended up with 2 envelopes and some other gift here. At the end of the game, we do circle back to the player who went first, because they didn't get the opportunity to steal at the beginning of the game, so then they just get the option to steal or keep the gift that they currently have. After that final swap, then everyone's going to be opening up the envelopes that they still have in their possession, if they have any, and then everyone's going to be adding up their cards to see who has the highest sum of cards, and whichever player that is gets to do one final bonus swap that does not cascade into additional swaps. They just get a guaranteed action to get whichever gift they want, which is why it's so important to try and hang on to as many envelopes as possible. Of course, you don't know what's in the envelopes, so there is a chance that someone with less envelopes in their possession could have a higher sum than you. And it is a little anticlimactic if the person with the highest sum of cards doesn't want to trade their gift at all. So if that's the case, we go to the player with the second highest sum, and then they get to decide whether they want to do that final swap. And if they do, then that ends the game and everyone gets to go home with the gifts that they have. But this is just a game of silly fun, so if anyone wants to make any trades or negotiations after the game is completed, that is perfectly fine. If you do want to try this out, I do have the rules already written up, and they're super short, and you can go ahead and check them out. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. And if you are interested in getting the same deck of cards and envelopes that I have here, I did just buy these on Amazon, so I'll throw some affiliate links in the description as well if you do want to grab those in order to complete the entire experience of the game. And this is a game that I do iterate on every time I play it if I do find any room for improvement. I think it's in a really good spot right now, so I don't know that there's going to be too many changes from where it is right now. But if you do end up trying it, and if you have any improvements or ideas or variants, I am really interested to hear about those, so feel free to email me at adam@shelfclutter.com or to message me over on the Discord, and maybe I'll give your variant a try the next time I play this. And speaking of gifts, we are back with some giveaways this week, and the first one is going to be for the highest pledge offered on the Revenant campaign, and this is the next game offered from Mind Clash Games, who always does a fantastic job with their games. And this one is really interesting because this is a worker placement game where your different worker locations are these various ships that are also going to be attacked every round, and if a ship is completely destroyed, then that worker placement location can actually be permanently removed from the game. What's neat about the different ships is that each of them do also belong to a different house within the Starfleet, and every time you take an action with a particular house's ship, that's going to be moving you up the alliance track for that house. This gets you victory points at the end of the game, but you're going to get even more victory points if more of that house's ships have survived. You're going to be using your actions to gain resources, repair, upgrade, or defend those ships. And each of your workers can also be upgraded, and you do also have your own personal ship that you can also upgrade as well. As players make these upgrades, your actions are going to get more and more powerful as the game goes on, but of course the player with the most victory points at the end of the game is going to be the winner of the game, and this giveaway is going to be for the Admiral Edition, which is an all-in pledge which gets you all of the miniatures, all of the expansions, and all of the upgraded components. So I should take a quick moment here and just thank Mindclash Games for donating such an awesome pledge, and I'm super excited for whoever wins this one. And this giveaway is offered nearly worldwide, so if you are in North America, the UK, the EU, Australia, or New Zealand, definitely feel free to enter this one, and all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Revenant, and you can say anything that you want, but if you are looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know if you have any fun plans over the upcoming holidays. And the next giveaway we have is for a pledge for Planepita, which is a dexterity game that also incorporates magnets into the board and pieces, and this is a really interesting dexterity game. It does play similarly to games like Crokinole, but each player is going to have their own pieces that they're going to be flicking out onto the board. There's going to be different rings that you're going to be flicking your pieces into, and you can try to knock out opponents' pieces by bumping into them, but every time you flick a piece, you can choose if you want to flip it to the other side where the magnet is more powerful, and this is going to make it more difficult for other players to knock your piece off the board. But the catch here is that piece will be worth less victory points at the end of the game if it is face down. But even though it could be worth less points, it does come with one other very important benefit, and that's that there's going to be this neutral token in the center of the board at the beginning of the game, and whichever ring that ends up at the end of the game, any pieces that are in that ring that are still face up are going to be eliminated from the scoring. So even though a face-up piece could be worth more victory points at the end of the game, it is a lot more risky because 1, it's easier to knock off the board, and 2, it could be eliminated if you allow yourself to end up in the same location as that neutral piece. And this giveaway is going to get you a standard pledge, which gets you a copy of the game as well as all unlocked stretch goals. And this one is offered worldwide, so you can feel free to enter this no matter where you are. And in order to enter it, all you got to do is leave a comment down below. You can say anything that you want, just make sure to leave the hashtag PETA in it. This is going to make me hungry. And the last giveaway we have is for a pledge for Park Life, which is a tableau building trick-taking game. And in this game, players are going to be dealt a hand of cards each round, and then players are going to be playing those cards into tricks with the lowest value of the lead suit winning that particular trick. You don't have to follow suit in this game, so if you want to save some cards for a later trick, you are able to do that. But every time that you do win a trick, you get to keep the card that you played in your own personal tableau. The amount of points it's worth at the end of the game is dictated by the value on the card, but like I said, it's the lowest valued card that wins the trick. So trying to win a trick with a higher valued card is more difficult. A really interesting aspect of this game is that there's also these 1x multiplier cards, and they actually have a variable value depending on how many cards of the same suit you already have in your tableau. And then there's these other cards here that are going to be multiplying based on how many matching suits each of your neighbors have in their tableau. These add some really interesting strategies in the game where you could add those into your tableau with their values essentially being 0 if you have no other cards that they can multiply off of. But then as the game goes on and you and your neighbors are adding more cards into your tableaus, those cards can actually be worth quite a bit by the end of the game. But this campaign actually adds a new expansion with a bunch of new cards that you can mix into the game, and they all add quite a lot of variety in their own different ways. You can mix and match them however you want, or just include the whole expansion content into your base game. There are also 2 versions of the base game, with the Hedgehog Edition and then the more advanced People Edition, but both of these can be mixed with the new expansion. And this giveaway is going to get you your choice of either of these 2 editions as well as the new Storm expansion. And to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Storm. And this is another giveaway that's offered nearly worldwide, and if you're in North America, UK, the EU, Australia, or New Zealand, you can feel free to enter this one. Good luck in the giveaways, but that is everything I have for you this week, and I hope there's something there that caught your interest. But as always, thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.